Just to introduce myself, I'm Nathan. I'm going to be your host today. So I'll be jumping off screen in a little bit to let Andrew and Paul do most of the talking. But in terms of the structure of this webinar, if you do have any questions for the guys, then feel free to put them in the Q&A section. And after they're done talking, we're gonna have a little Q&A session. So you'll see me again then. But for now, it's over to Paul to get us kicked off.
All right. Well, thanks, Nathan. And hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Really excited to talk about how we do integrations and specifically how we do pub sub and why this is the integration pattern that we follow at Compoze Labs when we're building software that we consider mission critical for a company. Real quickly about myself, I am the co-founder and managing partner of Compoze Labs. I focus a lot on the strategy and the operations of Compoze Labs. And beyond that, I sit as a board member on a few tech startups. And Lars, maybe I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
Yep. So I'm Andrew Larsen, also sometimes go by Lars, as Paul mentioned. So yeah, I'm one of the other co-founders as well as the CTO. So I have a deep background in integration as well as consulting, as well as just general custom software development and cloud. And so that's really where a lot of this expertise comes to bear, particularly what we're about to talk about today. So I'm really excited to talk about it. It's something that I've lived and breathed for most of my career.
All right, I am so excited to talk about this with you. So just a quick recap. Last time we had a webinar, we talked about how you can treat your data as a product and what happens when you do that right and you get this beautiful data lake that you can glean a lot of insights from, and what happens when you do it wrong and you get this not a data lake but a data swamp and this apparently like an ecosystem for Bigfoot over there. But today we're going to take a step back a little bit and talk a little bit more about how we set up this integration in order to enable something like treating your data as a product. So it's going to be a little bit higher level bird's eye view of the integration. All right, so like I said, today's agenda, why would we integrate? What types of integrations are there? Why a data hub? That's a specific type of integration that we like to do. And Lars is going to come in and close us out with how we implement these data hubs or this pub sub model, which we'll talk a lot more about. So real quickly about us, Compoze Labs, we are a software consulting firm. Like Lars says, we specialize in integrations, but first and foremost, our focus is on enabling innovation for our partners, and we are able to do that a lot with our integration expertise. When we talk about integrations, there's two types that we specialize in and that we do. One would be software only, right? How do I connect maybe a QuickBooks to a CRM like Salesforce to an e-commerce site, right? So that's all software to software. The other type of integration that we do a lot of is the hardware to software hybrid solutions, where maybe you're doing something with a camera and an ID scanner and connecting that into a software system like a point of sale system. So when we talk about doing data hubs and doing integrations, it can be for either one of these. All right, so let's move into it. So really maybe a philosophical question. Why integrate? Why would we do something like this? Why would any business choose to do this? And one answer would be because it gives you a strategic advantage for growth and defense, right? And Lars, first question for you. When you read that mumble jumble, maybe an executive would say that, but in layman's terms, what do you think strategic advantage for growth and defense means?
Yeah, I think it's really about enabling your software ecosystem, your software architecture to grow with the demands of your business. So oftentimes the way we're thinking about software is it's less about hey, we need to go build this specific thing. It doesn't matter, but we really want to be thinking about the future of, okay, how are, as we're getting great feedback from our clients' customers and from the customers themselves and the business, we want to be able to innovate and change rapidly. And so that's the way we think about our software architecture. So Paul, and I guess as far as the defense side of it goes, it's really about posturing ourselves from a software perspective so that we can adapt as the market around us changes as well.
That was a very thought out answer. I put you on the spot and you delivered. I was gonna make it a lot more simple. When you hear, I agree with everything you said. But on top of that, when you hear an executive say, "Oh, we need a strategic advantage for growth," they're literally saying, "How do I make more money?" And when you say, "I need some strategic defense," it's really, how do I make sure other people don't take my money? So if you want to say this in the executive world, right, you would say strategic advantage for growth. In layman's term, we're saying, how do we make more profit than we're already making, and how do we make sure to make sure that we can keep that profit and that's not distributed to our competitors. So anywho, kind of going back to why and how do we realize this profit, there's really three buckets that I would put the why into, and how we realize this profit. And Lars, you said this in a way, but I'm gonna break it down into three steps. One would be differentiated capabilities. So as a company, what are the additional features that I have that you don't? These are maybe even like, what are the awesome superpowers that I have that I'm able to do as a company because of my integrations that are unique to me that other people don't? The other reason you would integrate would be to improve efficiency or reduce costs. This is maybe a lot to do with automations, right? If I'm trying to close my books at the end of the month and it usually takes me a week or even 2 weeks to do, what automations can we put in place in that so that's now only taking a day or two, right? And then the third bucket I would say of why you integrate is for insights, right? How can I use my business intelligence, machine learning, and AI to look at what is happening at my company and make data-driven decisions for how I will get that growth in the future? So that's the three reasons why. And what I'll say is this is kind of like a Venn diagram, right? These are not necessarily mutually exclusive. If we think about a Venn diagram, there's going to be some overlap between each of these buckets. Some of my differentiated capabilities could also mean that I'm helping to reduce costs. So some overlap, but these are kind of how I think about the why you would ever want to consider integrating. Lars, would you agree with these?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe one of the interesting things on, I speak as a CTO from the technical side of it. As far as the machine learning and artificial intelligence side of it goes, a lot of the AI and ML people that I have worked with and talked with in the past, these days with all of the frameworks, all the technologies out there, I would say they reckon the majority of their time is not spent building sophisticated ML or AI algorithms. It's about getting the right data into the right place. And that's a lot of what we're talking about, and really goes back to that data lake versus data swamp conversation we had as well. Your insights are only as good as the data that you have.
Love it. All right. So let's move out of the hypothetical into more of a real world example. And one thing I want to talk about and define is an omni-channel experience. This is something that's been talked a lot more in business and becoming really important to a lot of companies. So first, to talk about what omni-channel is, I'm going to say what it's not. It's not necessarily just multi-channel. It used to be, maybe back in the early 2000s, early 2010s, that you want to be multi-channel, that if there was a way for a customer to interact with you, whether that be on a website, your e-commerce site, a brick and mortar store, or customer support, that you provided all those channels to your customers. That's kind of the old world now, right? What omni-channel does is, yes, you still need to have all those channels, but they need to be connected so that a user can seamlessly move from one to another. If I buy something online, then my mobile app should know that. In store, the employees in store should know that, and customer support should know that as well. I shouldn't have to start over. I should be able to move from one to another, and that requires business critical integrations between all these different channels, right? And one example, just to make this even more concrete, Disney does a lot of good things. They do they do integrations well, and specifically one thing they do really well is the Magic Band program. Let's see if I can get that to pop up. There we go. So a big part of omni-channel is starting to blend between the physical world and the digital world, right? And what this Magic Band does is it integrates with a lot of different things. This tool, this band that you wear, it acts as a hotel room key. Anytime you take a picture with any of the Disney cast, Cinderella, Mickey Mouse, it knows who you are, and so it's able to send those photos to you separately. So it basically stores photos for you of your Disney vacation. You can use it to order food, and it's a fast pass as well. So you can, if you have that option available, you're able to move up in the line. So basically, the goal of this is to keep your vacation moving, keep your vacation dynamic, and what Disney is thinking, right, from their end, is that anything that can make Disney money, let's remove the friction. Let's make that so simple so I can part you from your money in a very easy fashion. There's no friction. It's a very seamless experience with this omni-channel experience. All right. So that's Disney. Full cards on the table. We do not do any integrations with Disney yet. Disney, call me. But one of our clients that we do work with that we do something, in a similar fashion is Airfield. They're a cannabis company out in California. And if you haven't yet, definitely check out the video where they showcase a lot of the different things we've built for them. And they talk about the goal of blending that physical and digital world, where if I'm on the e-commerce site, I get a certain experience, but it's a seamless experience if I walk in the store. I'm able to go to a kiosk and see what I ordered online. And even the store kind of looks like the online store as well. This is a big LED wall that you see that, I don't know, it's 30 feet, 40 feet. I guess I don't know distances, but these cards that are on this LED wall, they show the inventory levels of what they have in store, just like they do online. And that looks very similar to your online experience. So that's just one example of the many that Airfield is looking to provide an omni-channel experience to their customers, which would not be able to happen without having the omni-channel experience in mind and without being able to integrate everything throughout their company. All right. Lars, did you know what omni-channel was before this, or did I just teach you what that new term?
I did an omni-channel implementation for a big box retailer about 8 years ago.
Okay. All right.
Nice try, though.
Nice try. I almost got you. All right. So as part of this, what we're kind of alluding to is that there's a few different types of integrations. And really there's maybe two buckets that I want to talk about. One would be a point-to-point integration, and one would be a data hub. And when I say data hub, you can kind of think of a hub and spoke model. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more depth here soon. But first, another question I think I can get you on. Do you know who this man is or what he's done?
No idea.
Okay. Didn't expect you to. This man is named Frederick Smith, and he is kind of the father of the hub and spoke model for postal carriers. What interesting background on him, during his undergrad, he had a vision, or he had kind of a mission of being able to send mail from anywhere in the US to anywhere else in the US within 2 days. And he actually wrote a paper on this, and his professor didn't believe him or didn't like his thinking, and he actually got a failing grade, or maybe at best a mediocre grade, right? So his professor didn't think it was a good idea. But what he wrote about was a hub and spoke model. And I don't know if that paper spurned him to start a company or that gave him a little chip on his shoulder, but this man is the man who started FedEx. And indeed, by being able to use and leverage the hub and spoke model, he was able to get mail across the country in just a few days. And to illustrate that that point of why that is so critical to their business and why that was revolutionary at the time when he started this, I think it was 1960 or so. I actually don't want to talk about mail. I want to talk about airlines with hub and spoke, because while Frederick Smith was the first person to do this for postal services, actually about 10 or 15 years earlier, Delta Airlines actually pioneered this hub and spoke model. Now, when we talk about hub and spoke, right, you might, for those of you in Minneapolis, you might hear a lot that, oh, you're in Minneapolis, like, oh, that's a Delta major hub. And that essentially means, when looking at this picture, right, that, oh, there's where the dark red lines are, right? A lot of airlines are going into that central hub. And I'm gonna actually pull up another application here to talk about why this is so revolutionary and what this means for software as well. So we'll put this up. So for one, when we talk about point to point, right, we're talking about basically direct integrations, right? So if I wanted to connect, say, these two applications, that's direct. If I add a third in there, I would need to connect that to this one. But if I need these two to talk, I would also need to do another integration. So that'd be 3 integrations. When we do hub and spoke, it's going to look a little bit more like this. When I say hub and spoke, I mean our data hub framework that we're following here. So that's what this is going to look like. But I want to specifically talk about Delta real quick. So we're going to do a Delta example. Now, why is hub and spoke so powerful? Well, if I have, let's see, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different cities here. And what used to happen for mail and for airlines would be I would do more or less direct connections, which is like a direct integration. And so if I want to fly from 2 locations, that would be a direct flight. But if I want to fly from Minneapolis to, I don't know what city that is, Louisville, Kentucky, there would be that. But now, say I want people from Louisville to be able to fly to California. Maybe that's LA. But LA needs to also fly to Oregon. And if I start building out all these direct flights, I get something like this. Could this be cleaned up a little bit? Yes, but there's a lot of lines here. There's a lot of flights. That's a lot of operational overhead that I have to care about, right? For example, right, if I am Miami, Florida here, and I need to change a gate or something needs to change and I need to communicate that out, there's a lot of different flights that care about that, right? I have to tell 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different locations about this change. So not only do I need to communicate that out, these guys care about that as well. And I think there's something like, I don't know, 30, maybe 20 different flights that I am showing here when you have just 6 different locations. Where this becomes powerful is, and what Delta said was, this is not scalable. I need something scalable, right? So they pioneered, like I said, the hub and spoke model. This looks a lot cleaner, and I am able to fly people anywhere I need to, just the same as I did over here, but with a lot less flights. And now in this example, right, if something changes with Florida, guess what? They only have to tell Minneapolis. If I'm out in Seattle or California, I don't really necessarily care what's going on here. It's just this team that needs to worry about that. So it's much more scalable, and it's, I'm going to say, even much more reliable. There's not going to be this domino effect that's going to hurt as many other airlines if something changes on your end. Okay. Another quiz time for Lars. I'm going to give you, I'm looking for numbers here. So if I want to say Minneapolis to Florida, Florida to Minneapolis is 1 flight, right? Like, that's not 2. I get it, you can go both ways, but let's just count that as from city to city, 1 flight. Fair enough so far, right?
Yep.
if I'm using the hub and spoke model and I'm Delta and I have 10 different cities to fly to, how many flights do I need to manage?
10.
So close, and I'm so happy you got this wrong. It's actually 9. It's one less flight than the amount of cities I need to care about. And this kind of starts to talk about the scalability of this, right? So here, for example, right, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you don't believe me, right, there's 6 cities here. There are only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different flights. So this is powerful, right? I can add on a city, and if I'm using the hub and spoke model, I'm really only adding on a flight. And in fact, there's one less flight than there are the number of cities. As compared to over here, Lars, if I have 10 cities, how many flights do I need to manage if I'm doing point to point?
A lot more.
A lot more, that is correct. And actually, I don't know the number. It's like 45 to 55 different flights that I need to manage. It's a lot. It becomes unscalable and unsustainable. So yeah, just imagine having to add another city here. I'm not just adding one more flight like my other model. I'm adding 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's like 6 different flights just from adding one city. That's a lot of operational overhead for an incremental location. And so this should be no surprise to us that the model that works so well for Delta and for airlines to keep them profitable, the model that revolutionized the way that mail is sent across the country, that same model works extremely well for IT infrastructure as well. So again, just to really drive this point home, if I have point to point and it's a simple integration, sure, do direct, no problem. The issue though comes when I want to scale. If I'm a growing company, it's going to start to get chaotic, right? If I need to change something about this integration, there's a lot of different touch points, and heaven forbid, I need to add another application in here. It's going to be even more of a tangled mess. So that's why we want to do this kind of scalable hub and spoke model when we build out integrations. And so that if I want to add another one, say, oh, I don't know, I want to add in HubSpot, it's really only this team, this integration that cares about it. Another, maybe the QuickBooks integration team or the source code over here doesn't care about it. It's much more scalable. And by the way, this is SplushSO database. By the way, all your data is now centralized as well. So you can use your Tableau, Power BI, Data Studio, machine learning, AI to get the analytics that you need at your company to know thyself. So that's what I wanted to talk about. This is more the why you would want to integrate using a hub and spoke model, or what we're calling more the data hub model. So with that being said, Lars, I talked about the why. Your turn to talk more about the how.
Sounds good. I can't wait to put you on the spot on a bunch of different things. All right, let's see. Are you seeing my screen?
I am, yes.
Okay. Actually, when Paul first brought that the Delta example as a metaphor for this, I was very skeptical until he started to talk about it, and then I was like, "Huh, that actually is a really good way to kind of represent this as a metaphor for the software side of it." So I'm going to jump in. So the first thing before I get too deep into the how is I'm going to basically talk about some of those advantages, but put a little more, I'll say, technical terms to this advantage. So, under the hood, when we talk about that hub and spoke model, the pattern you may remember for those from like a traditional integration architecture is a pub sub model or a publish subscriber. So the idea with that is that you have publishers that have data that needs to get sent out. So for example, an e-commerce site or new orders are created, or a shopping cart was updated. Those types of orders, or those types of that type of information, those are publishers. And then subscribers would be the pieces of your system that want to know about that. So in this example right here, I have on screen, we have our e-commerce portal. And then down at the bottom, you have 3 systems that would care about what's happening from an e-commerce perspective. So we have a payment platform on the left that you need to process payment when an order is placed. You might have Salesforce or some sort of CRM where maybe you're tracking campaign information, and you want to be able to know what orders were placed with what discounts and on what marketing campaign. And then you also may need to have your order fulfillment system that needs to know, okay, an order was just placed. I need to get my product to the customers and where they need to go. So in this example, this is a point-to-point. So this is the e-commerce portal that's calling each of the different systems, the payment platform, then the CRM, then the order fulfillment, and doing that integration point to point. Now there's some challenges with this, as Paul was talking about, is what happens when the order fulfillment system needs to change. So that integration now has changed. Well, the e-commerce portal all of a sudden has to care about that. You have to modify your e-commerce site in order to handle the change to the order fulfillment. And now what happens, say, if we have a new system that comes online that needs to care about orders or something coming out of the e-commerce site, the e-commerce code base now has to change in order to accommodate that. And that is unnecessary change, that is unnecessary complexity that does not scale over time. And in the software world, we call this tight coupling, that the pieces of your system know and care about the other pieces of your system. So now if we talk about, so now let's start to explore what this would look like using the pub sub model to try to achieve our data hub. So the way you do that is with what's called a messaging system. So some sort of queue, some sort of topic. There's a number of great technologies out there, RabbitMQ, Apache Kafka, the JMS stack. The cloud providers have their own. We're a big fan of Amazon's EventBridge. But let's look at now, let's take a step back. So we have our e-commerce portal, and we now introduce a series of messaging queues to communicate order information. So the first thing we have is the CRM subscriber, Salesforce. So that's going to be reading from that queue and doing whatever it needs to do. Then we need to add the payment platform in. Well, you'll notice that there's only one line that's been drawn to the payment platform from those queues, because the e-commerce portal does not have to care. The messaging system in between has now loosely coupled our components so that we can have an arbitrary number of subscribers that can adhere to this stream of data, that can subscribe to the stream of data. And so we can add our order fulfillment, and it just continues to work. And so what we call this is, we say that this is a scalable architecture, not necessarily from a performance perspective, although that absolutely has this advantage. But when we say scalable, we mean the ability to change, adapt, and add new functionality quickly. That's what we talk about when we talk about scalable. And that's really the power that this pattern and this framework gives you by decoupling your system. Okay, so let's talk about kind of the next technical side of it. So we just talked about scalable. Now let's talk about building a robust system, how that makes our system more robust. There's really 3 ways that we talk about it. Is we eliminate single points of failure. We allow for very easily retry and replayability. And we have durable error scenarios that will allow our system to continue to perform. So let's dive in really quick and talk about what we mean by that. So failures. So by decoupling our system, by having each of our downstream systems operating independently of one another, we now allow for a piece of our system to go down, but not affect the rest of the system. So what do I mean by that? So let's take this example. Let's say Salesforce goes down. Let's say, sysadmin screws something up, or there's a network outage or whatever. There's a million things that can go wrong in software. But let's say Salesforce can no longer process messages. So when we talk about the ability to not have a single point of failure, the e-commerce portal has no idea that downstream system is down, right? It continues to publish messages. It can continue to take customer orders. And in addition, the payment platform and the order fulfillment systems can continue to operate and do what they need to do. Just because Salesforce is not currently tracking the marketing campaign information doesn't mean that our customers should not be able to have their orders fulfilled. And so that's really that kind of that power of that decoupled system is you eliminate a lot of these single points of failure. So then retriability. So now let's talk about what happens when Salesforce is down, right? So there's a number of reasons something might go down, but one of them might be something like a network blip. There's just a temporary outage that is preventing Salesforce from connecting to the queue that we have messages flowing over. Well, with the pub sub model, with this message model, there's a pattern called retry queuing. And the idea is that when if a message fails, you have these machinery, these mechanisms in place that it's going to retry it a few times. So there's a lot of details that I won't get into the total nitty gritty about that, but it's basically this idea that, you know, Salesforce, it tries to process a message and something's wrong. Well, it says, hold on, you know, I'm going to give that back to you. Let me try again in a little bit. And the idea is that if there is some sort of intermediate problem, that we can, you know, we can still process in near real time. So we're still going to eventually get those messages. And in the scenario of kind of this intermittent issue that will be fixed relatively quickly, you can still process on a relatively quick timeline. And then, yeah, go ahead, Paul.
What happens if you don't have a queue in here? Sorry if I'm jumping the.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's a great question. Thank you. So if you think about like the point-to-point situation, your error scenarios become much more complex. So for example, if you naively have that point-to-point integration where you're going, hey, you know, payment platform processes payment. Hey, CRM, take this new invoice. And then you say, hey, order fulfillment, fulfill this order. Well, if your CRM is down, you might not be able to get the chance to call out to your order fulfillment. So without this decoupled asynchronous messaging in between there, and specifically with this publish subscriber model, anything that goes down in your system is going to bring down your whole system. And you don't, and especially in an e-commerce site, it's very important to continue to process customer orders. You can get the analytics eventually. Thank you. And a great point. And speaking of that, it actually leads really well into what I'm going to talk about now, is that we also have durable storage for these error scenarios. So let's say either we do a deployment and we introduce a bug into our code, or maybe our database goes down and it's down for 6 hours or something like that. So we have the ability to retry, but that's really in a shorter window. That's over like a 1 to 2 minute period. But what do we do with those messages for those 6 hours? So the great thing about this is that those messages don't go away. So there's a pattern called the dead letter queue, where if your consumer is processing the messages, but it's unable to do it successfully, those will eventually end up on a dead letter queue. And that's just another queuing mechanism where basically if the consumer says, I can't process this right now, store this for later. And then the idea, and so if you think about our CRM scenario, we still want to know the invoice or the marketing data, the orders that were created, so we can look at how our marketing campaigns went. Well, the idea is that if it does go down, eventually when it comes back up, those messages are still there and it can continue to process those. So that's what we sometimes refer to as guaranteed eventual delivery. So we are saying that you may not get it processed immediately, but we will eventually get that message processed.
Question.
Yes.
What happens if you don't have the queue and it's a direct integration? Is that just you're risking losing that message?
Yeah, basically what it means is so naively, you just lose the message. If you're just implementing, I'm trying to make it, it just drops on the floor and you never see it again, right? So if you do it in a naive fashion, you just lose that. Otherwise, if you understand the risks, there is just a lot of custom code that you have to write to implement that. You're basically implementing a dead letter queue, but without leveraging the tools and technologies that are good at it. Okay. So then let's talk about flexible. So we talked about we're able to move fast. We're able to, be reliable and robust, but we're also very flexible. And so what does that mean? So what are some examples of that? So for one thing, we talked about scaling the architecture, but there's also a performance flexibility that you get. So obviously the order fulfillment part of your system is very important to be as close to real time as possible. If you look at Amazon, that's one of their big missions, right? Is how to go from a customer placed an order to you have the product at your home. That's one of their core missions and what they're really driving for. So those types of use cases are going to demand more processing power, need to perform faster than other parts of your system. So let's in this example, Salesforce. So we talked about that we want to know about our marketing campaigns and how they're doing, but maybe we only look at them once a day. Maybe we only look at that once a week because we want to make sure we have enough information there. Do we really need to have the same amount of infrastructure and scalability dedicated to Salesforce as we do to the order fulfillment? Well, I would argue no. And that's that flexibility that you get, is that you can scale out your order fulfillment side of the system far easier and independently from the rest of your software system. And finally, this is kind of what we talked about way at the beginning of the conversation, is that we're building. Is this ultimately lets you build for the long term? And so what do I mean by that? Well, if you look on the left side there, this is that point-to-point that Paul was demonstrating with Delta flights. It's you have all of these pieces of your system that know about one another, and they have to know about one another. So the minute you need to add new features for your customer, the minute you need to make a change to an existing customer or an existing feature, you have to know all of the parts of that system and where changes are needed to be made. As opposed to on the right side there with this more hub and spoke publish subscriber model, if you need to make a change to the order fulfillment platform, the only bit of code that you need to touch is in the order fulfillment platform. And that's really a powerful concept and really lets you grow and iterate with your business at the speed that your business needs you to grow. All right, Paul, moving on to the next part. You got any more questions for me?
No, I just a comment that I love that last point, that the market is moving rapidly, right? Make sure your IT infrastructure can move along with you so that you can meet the needs of the market. The last thing you want to do is have your own IT, your own systems slow you down.
Yep. And so I'll go quickly through how we think about implementing this kind of pub sub data hub model. I do know we want to reserve some time at the end for questions, so I will. Nathan, how are we doing on time?
We're running a bit late, but yeah, run through this and we'll see how many questions we get to.
Okay, sounds good. So when you're actually going to go about implementing this, there's really 4 areas you need to focus on. One, defining your overall business outcome. You need to have an understanding of what is driving this, right? You don't want to build something for the sake of building it. You want to start with, what are my use cases? What am I trying to get out of this? And go from there. Next, identify what are your systems? What are the publishers? What are the subscribers? What are the things that are going to be sending out information and receiving it? Finally, we call it defining your domain models. So like, what are the key bits of information in your system? So orders, customers, products, inventory, et cetera, starting to define those. And then the final step is, okay, what are the actions? What are the events that take place against those models? So the creation of an order, the cancellation of an order, an update of an order, and that is really the backbone and the basis for going ahead and implementing this pattern. I'll just touch on this really briefly. One really powerful exercise is what's called event storming. And so that's really all those things I talked about defining. This is a really good way to visually go about representing this. And it's a really great exercise and we have a lot of fun doing it. Here's a concrete example of what this might look like. It's smaller, but this is basically, we talked about our e-commerce use case. This is what, some of that event storming might actually turn into. So this would be, basically sticky notes. And we're talking about, okay, we have a new order created, and then what do each of those systems need to do with it? And then finally, Paul talked about Airfield Supply Co. Well, this is, an example of a similar customer. And down at the bottom, we went through this exercise. We defined what our domain models were. We defined what our events were. And then what we ended up being able to do is take that and start to build new functionality and new features quickly. And this can continue to expand out and continue to grow. We're adding new products and new features and functionality just about every week. And that's really the power that we get from this pattern, and from really taking taking control of our data. And it's been really fun. And it's, as someone that's been in, built software in those systems that are very tightly coupled, it's painful. Nobody wants to do it. And it's really fun and interesting as an engineer when that data is just right there, ready and available, and you can just start building products. You don't need to bug anybody. You just say, hey, the data is already there. I'm just going to grab it and I'm going to run with it. And
what I'm reading this as, right, is that in the orange in the bottom, you're saying, hey, in my domain model, in my hub, there's a concept of inventory. There's a concept of products. When I'm building I suppose, products, software products, I can pull information from that or put information into those buckets to be able to rapidly.
Yeah, you can subscribe. Yep. You can subscribe to that information and you can publish into that. Yep, exactly. Hence pub sub model. Okay. All right, Nathan, I'm done.
Cool, you got there. That was really good stuff, guys. Super interesting. We are at 45 minutes in, which is what we had this scheduled for. I think there's no harm in still doing this Q&A. Anyone that needs to drop can drop, and I'll make sure to distribute this webinar to anyone, well, to everyone anyway, so you can pick it up at a later time. But the first thing I'm going to do, Paul, is challenge your Delta analogy, because I know it came up a lot. It's my understanding that airlines like Delta were kind of moving away from this like central hub kind of model, because they wanted to add more direct flights to compete with low-cost airlines. Is that either not true, or what would the reason for that be?
Yeah, thanks for the challenge. I appreciate that. So first and foremost, right, hub and spoke, it's a model, right? It's a framework, something to follow. It's not going to be something that's necessarily always written in stone. With that said, you are correct that there's other airlines that start to pop up, like Southwest, I think it is one, right? That they started to carve out a niche by being able to go direct to direct, right? And they did a really good job with that. And so these bigger airlines, Delta, United, American Airlines, they wanted to compete with the likes of Southwest. So they started to offer more direct as well, or what we're calling more point to point. And so if you would have read an article before actually COVID, it would have said is the hub and spoke model dead? Like, is that a thing of the past? But what's really interesting that I absolutely love about this and speaks to the validity and the reliability of hub and spoke is that COVID occurred. A major pandemic happened, and that really shook a lot of things that we were accustomed to. And what Delta and United Airlines actually ended up doing was they actually backed up and relied and fell back into the hub and spoke model. That was the most profitable way to be able to continue doing business, and that hub and spoke model actually got them through the pandemic. And so when the going gets tough, they went back to hub and spoke, not point to point. And it looks like now, because they need to harden themselves and get ready for other dips in the economy as things move forward, they're going to further build out their capabilities via hub and spoke model, not so much point to point.
Okay, so that makes sense. When things are going well, you can kind of get away with anything, but when challenges come up, it makes sense to go for the more efficient model, right? Another question that came in was, is there any scenario where we do recommend doing other types of integration, or are we just pub sub all the way?
I can
Lars,
take
that
that
sounds
one.
good. Yeah.
So I think my answer is significantly different than it would have been 5 or 6 years ago. So I think 5 or 6 years ago, a lot of this technology, specifically around the queuing and messaging, I'll say it wasn't nearly as robust, particularly before the real advent of these cloud providers. So Amazon, Azure, Google. And what I mean by that is there is a lot of machinery you have to stand up. You have to stand up your instance of RabbitMQ. You have to do all the configuration and the storage and get all of that set up. So for a more simple scenario, I would have been much more likely to be like, just do point to point and move on with your life. It'll be faster. If you need to change it in the future, you can invest the time and resources into that. But really with the cloud providers, and even beyond that, even just with a lot of the innovation and technology, the amount of effort it takes to get that stood up and be enterprise scalable has reduced significantly. And that's even a lot of, we leverage that internally to take that a step further. So we have our own products, specifically, the Compoze platform, where we can get we can get a full hub and spoke model, the infrastructure stood up in about 5 minutes. And that was something that just wasn't possible 6 years ago. There just wasn't that level of sophistication or automation out there to enable us to do that. So, if you truly have just, 1 or 2, maybe 3 systems, you don't plan on innovating or moving beyond that, point to point might be just fine. You can spin up Zapier in a really short amount of time and get something integrated and moving forward. But we really do strongly believe that if you are looking to build an ecosystem and you're looking to innovate from a software perspective, we think this is, the best way to enable and build an architecture that is flexible, scalable, and robust enough to grow with you and innovate with you.
Awesome, thank you. And you say there it's the best way, but I guess no system is perfect. Are there any kind of perceived negatives of pub sub in terms of implementation and maybe, I don't know, cost?
Certainly there's more moving parts. So I think you're right. Everything in software is about trade-offs. There is no silver bullet. But, in this case, the trade-off is it may be a little bit slower to get moving, to get started. It will be a little bit slow, and slower means spend a little bit more money, right? But at the end of the day, it's kind of like a bell curve. You may start off a little bit slower, but then as you continue to, build and innovate, you're going to see a significant savings.
Okay, awesome, cool. I think that's all the questions I have for you guys. So yeah, really appreciate you both taking the time to put this together. I know a lot of work went into it last week and over the weekend. So I hope everyone that's watching got some value from it. And as I say, I will send this recording around to everyone that's listened if you want to follow up. And of course, you know where to reach us if you do have any questions. Paul, Lars, any closing notes before we shut this thing off?
Hub and spoke's the way to go.
There we go.
Say that? Yeah.
We'll end on that note. Well, thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks.